We got Jailton Almeida next up, taking on Alexander Romanov. And I tweeted that this could be the best grappling match on paper that the UFC can make right now inside the octagon. It is certainly a interesting matchup. And we've got both guys coming off of being fraud checked, so to speak, right? That's the new word of the week. That's the new thing everybody wants to say. You lose a fight, you're a fraud. You don't win a fight dominantly enough, you're a fraud. You go to a split decision, you're a fraud. Like anybody for any reason's a fraud. But in any case, it was a little bit of a eye-opening fight against Curtis Blaydes. Curtis Blaydes is a top guy, right? He's about to fight for the title in the heavyweight division. He's been around for a long time, has a ton of UFC experience. That was what I sold him short on. I thought to myself, man, this guy Curtis Blaydes will never fight for the title again. He's not very marketable. He doesn't have a fun style. And he's just talented. He's just good at fighting. And from meritocracy, he's hard to get one over on, right? He was able to defend most of the takedowns from Jailton Almeida. Jailton got to some good positions, but ultimately wasn't able to get to a dominant position. He was able to get him to his hands. He was able to get him to a couple spots where he had to defend, but he never was able to get his back solidly, with a body triangle or anything like that. And it just showed that the inefficiency with the wrestling and the lack of hurting power. Like what you want to see from a guy is that if they're not going to get the takedown, they're hurting their opponent against the fence. They're landing shots. They're scoring points. And what we saw instead was Jailton really sold out for the wrestling and grappling, and then he did not have very much left to offer. On the other side, though, Romanov looked like he showed up and ate Alexander Romanov. He looked like a much less slimmed down version of himself. Guys, he lost a majority decision to Marcin Tybura. That probably should have been a draw. I'm going to take a sip of the old coffee here. But I'll tell you guys this. When you look at Jailton, right, I'm not advocating going to lay this big minus 230 price or whatever. That's not right. Romanov has never been an underdog in the UFC. As best I remember, this is from the top of my head, but the guy has actually closed as the biggest favorite in UFC history before when he took on Chase Sherman. So when you look, both these guys are black belts, and I think Jailton Almeida is the superior black belt of the two. But here's the problem. We're dealing with heavyweight MMA. And what's fascinating about heavyweight MMA is that if you have one guy who's a less quality black belt, but we're in a face punching contest and I'm on top of you, it doesn't really matter who's more sophisticated with their barambolos. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like when you have 265 pounds on your chest, it's not really about who knows more about jiu-jitsu right now for a second. It's more about, can I get this big lug off of me? I can't breathe. I watched the Romanov and Dawkins BJJ match. So what I will say is he's not a great finisher, right? And if you look at Jailton Almeida, he's done an excellent job of finishing guys most often in the UFC. But we did see the rubber meet the road, right? When he went against top 5 guys, Derek Lewis wasn't able to finish him. Went against another top 5 guy what's his name? Goodness gracious. Curtis Blaydes. I literally couldn't think of it, and it's what we were just discussing. But he went to a decision with Curtis Blaydes as well. He got finished, right? So when I'm talking about he can't finish the best guys, he can't get that submission necessarily on the best guys. I'm not saying Dawkins is the best guy either, but what I'm trying to point out is when you start to get to a certain quality of competition, maybe the finishes don't materialize. I think you and I would both agree it's easier to submit somebody in a mixed martial arts fight where you can punch them in the face than in a grappling match where it's only submission versus submission. And for Dawkins there, I think the win was, hey, can I go out there and not get submitted in front of my home crowd? And I think that for Romanov, he was out there trying to get more experience, trying to get that gas tank up a little bit. However, I do worry about Romanov because he does look doughy. He's training in Romania as best I understand. And I just haven't loved what I've seen from him in these recent fights. I bet Volkov as a dog, I think he was plus 115 for half a unit, and he just looked like he was not ready to compete at all. Then I bet him as an underdog against Blagoy Ivanov. And Blagoy looks like he's ready to retire, looks like he's past his prime, certainly physically. And that was a very close fight where he was not very convincing. So again, I haven't loved what I've seen from him. I think the better body of work so far in the UFC is Jailton Almeida. So I understand him being favored, but it's a heavyweight fight. And I just think whoever gets the first takedown in this fight is probably going to look like the hindsight favorite. I do think Romanov can take him down and get on top. That's the worry for me. And I do think if he does, then that might be what sends Jailton Almeida down a weight class. But for me, I think Jailton Almeida is live to win this fight, by multiple different methods. And I think whoever's in the top position is alive to win this fight via TKO. I mean, what is forgotten is just that these two guys are both pretty sound with their jiu-jitsu, but 265 pounds is 265 pounds. And in the case of Jailton Almeida, he's a heavy guy, and he could get on top and just unload with some ground and pound. We've seen him sit on the chest of guys who kind of, with all due respect, that look like morbidly obese people, in the UFC, and he's just sitting on their chest, throwing ground and pound, and gets the fight stopped against older guys. He's done that as well. And I do think that both of these guys have a chance to go out there and finish the fight, with their strikes on the top position. It's also a heavyweight fight. And if either one of these guys attempts strikes at a distance, which I think is possible, they could land and knock each other out. So that's something that I'm definitely looking at here as a potential sneaky angle. Shout out to Dixon. Says, Liam, I have a feeling Jailton's going to be terrified to gas. I think that's possible. He's going to fight at a slower pace, maybe a staring contest for a while. I think that's possible for sure. It's hard to know what to expect from these two guys. So this is a weird fight for me. And I'm probably not going to overinvest in this fight. This is one I'll probably, leave on the cutting room floor. But shout out to Moicano, says that Neto BJJ's problem, he's scared to gas, refuses to grapple proactively, mainly a striker because of the cardio. Yeah, I think that's something you certainly have to consider. But I also feel like when you're talking about these guys, I'd rather my guys gas out going for the finish and give themselves a chance to win than go out there and not do anything and just let the fight pass them by. So, it's definitely a fine line in mixed martial arts. But for me, I feel like this is an interesting, compelling heavyweight fight, but I don't know that I agree with the line being this wide, even though I'm a big Jailton guy. I bet Jailton last time against Curtis Blades. I got minus 105, closed minus 140. He dominated the first round, and then round two, he had nothing left to give. So it wasn't a great bet. And I think that got to learn from that, right? And now he's minus 300 against a big wrestler. And we could get another lesson that this guy's just not meant for heavyweight. So Jailton held Lewis down for 5 rounds. He won't gas in 3. The thing is, though, there wasn't much effective resistance from Derek in that fight. He just wasn't able to hurt him. He wasn't able to land anything effective. And by the way, that was just sloppy low doubles and low singles. And again, Alexander Romanov, you can say anything you want about him being fat, sloppy, out of shape, but you can't say that he doesn't know how to wrestle. That's the only thing that he does really well. He's a Moldovan wrestler. He does pick people up, slam them, throw them every which way but loose. So I think that when you're going out there and wrestling somebody that knows how to wrestle, that's a lot more exhausting than wrestling somebody who's just a big body. So just something to consider. But yeah, I largely agree with you, Nora, to be clear. Romanov will likely curl up like the Volkov fight. I think that's very possible. And I might just look for some unconventional props on this fight, if anything at all.